Hi, everybody. Today's Thursday, April 23rd, 2026, and our dear friend David Pine is here with us. Welcome back, David.
Hey, Nima, great to be back with you.
And let me start, David. Last time we talked, there was no war in the Middle East. Right now, there is a war going on, and we have some sort of ceasefire, but the war is going on. And I think it's good to just step back and look at what has happened so far. We had the 12-day war. And then this year on February 28th, we had the second round of the war. And here is what J.D. Vance said before the war. The first round of the war happening in June 2025. And the way that he was selling, he was buying the people in the United States into this war. Here is what he said.
With Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives. So this is not going to be some long, drawn-out thing. We've got in, we've done the job of setting their nuclear program back. We're going to now work to permanently dismantle that nuclear program over the coming years, and that is what the president has set out to do. Simple principle. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That has animated American policy over the past 130 days. It's going to continue to be a driving force of our policy in the Middle East for the next 3.5 years.
Getting back to today, yesterday we've learned that because of the consequences of the war, and it seems that there is some sort of discussions happening within the military. That's why we had the Secretary of Navy being fired by Pete Hegseth. What is your understanding of the current situation that Donald Trump, I think he has trapped himself in the Middle East somehow? Your understanding of that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just as Dr. Robert Pape has stated, the Iran war is an escalation trap that was set by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, essentially to force Trump and the United States to fight Israel's war against Iran to the detriment of U.S. national security, to the detriment of our economic security. This blockade, the war is not over yet. The blockade is continuing with no end in sight. And it's going to cause both a U.S. and a global recession. Unfortunately, that's going to affect most of the countries in the world very negatively. It's going to cause shortages. Obviously, gas prices are going up. Jet fuel is in very short supply, particularly in Europe, as well as East Asia, South Korea, and Japan, and other countries like that. So it's caused a lot of disruption. President Trump, he had a plan. He had a national security strategy, which was to pull us out of Europe and the Middle East, focus on the Western Hemisphere, providing security to our Western Hemispheric allies, as well as consolidating U.S. dominance in the North America region, perhaps with greater number of U.S. military forces in Greenland, trying to pressure communist regimes in Cuba and Venezuela, which are as yet largely untouched. And of course, prioritizing, trade in the U.S. economy. And this war has caused all of his great national security strategy and his America First trade policy to really go down the drain. All the economic progress that he was able to make in his first, 15, 16 months, I guess 13 months in office have been reversed and are much worse now. Gas prices are up, I think, 33 to 40%. That can get a lot worse because it's going to take, it would take 6 months just to clear the mines out of the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, there's no military solution to the U.S. regaining control. We never had control of the Strait of Hormuz, but at least we had, the U.S. was kind of able to assure that it remained a free transit international waterway. And that is no longer going to be the case because Iran has renamed it the Strait of Persia. It's now, it's effectively under IRGC control, under naval control, and there's nothing we can do about it short of some kind of making some grand concessions to Iran in a peace deal that they think are sufficient to allow free passage.
David, what is the off ramp? You mentioned the situation that Donald Trump is in right now, and many people are arguing the simple solution for that is just leaving the region, leaving just Iraq, Afghanistan, just leave the region, and the countries who are using the Strait of Hormuz, they're going to come and talk with the Iranians, and they're going to find their solution. They're sort of, but Donald Trump somehow, as you remember when this war started, it was all about regime change. It wasn't just because of Donald Trump himself reached that conclusion, because of Benjamin Netanyahu, as New York Times reported, he provided information to Donald Trump and his administration that it needs just to go there, attack the regime, just killing the supreme leader together with the commander, and the regime gonna collapse, and the people gonna come out and all of that. Coming back to this day, today, Donald Trump is posting something like this, that the leadership, there is a fracture in the leadership in Iran. Some people want to talk with us, make a deal. The other one, they don't want to make a deal. Let's go and kill the bad guys in Iran. You don't see this sort of conspiracy theories and this sort of delusional thinking. Is it going to help the United States? Is it going to help Donald Trump and his administration?
No, it's despicable and dishonorable behavior, even to threaten those attacks. Obviously, we murdered 50 Iranian leaders, along with members of the first family, the family of the supreme leader, both Ali Khamenei as well as Mujtaba Khomeini, the current supreme leader, and women and children. The U.S. and I guess it was Israel that did it, but fully U.S. supported. To murder those leaders, and this was an unprovoked sneak attack. I mean, Iran had, essentially been minding its own business. Yes, it had conducted its Iranian proxies had, killed and wounded a few, killed 3 U.S. troops. I think it was 2023. I think that was in response to what Israel is doing in Gaza. Obviously, the genocide. Initially it was a just war, but then Israel decided to turn it into a war of aggression by, destroying 92% of Gazan homes under the pretext that the 1.7% of Gazan citizens that were Hamas, were hiding there. Obviously, that was ridiculous, but. This has just proven disastrous. It's been disastrous for the U.S. on every level. Militarily, it's weakened us militarily, economically, politically. It's going to be disastrous. The Republicans are going to lose both houses of Congress. Trump's going to get impeached. There's an outside chance he could even be removed. But the bottom line is, Iran is. We keep saying that Iran is a different animal. That their Islamist regime is. They're terrorists. They can't be reasoned with. They only understand the use of force. In fact, the truth is the opposite. The U.S. and Israel, not that we're terrorist regimes, but we use state terrorism against other countries, killing their leadership for no reason, with no provocation, was an act of state-sponsored terror. And a lot of Americans don't understand that. We have. This idea, I think, in the United States, that the lives of Muslim civilians, or certainly, Islamic leaders, have no value. So, we're indoctrinated as American citizens by our government and our education system to cheerlead that. And I just think it's despicable. I've abandoned my support for President Trump. I've supported him for almost a decade. And since he started this war, I no longer support him. It's just, it's really a sad time to be an American, to be honest.
Yeah. You look at the Middle East today. What would you bring? What is the difference, when it comes to the Persian Gulf today? You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. How do you draw the differences before this war started and right now, the situation that we're in, considering Persian Gulf and GCC countries, Iran, and the region?
Well, the U.S. have been viewed as a source of stability and security for the Gulf nations, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and other countries. And it no longer is, because they found out the hard way that we started this unprovoked war of aggression against Iran, and they retaliated by attacking our bases. And they didn't just attack our bases; they also attacked some government and energy targets within those countries to essentially teach them a lesson that the U.S. is not the regional hegemon of the Persian Gulf, but the Islamic Republic of Iran is. And so, and the U.S. reacted not by increasing our missile defense and troop levels in those countries, but by, I believe, moving a lot of our, missile defenses and troops to Israel, or pulling out our troops to prove that our security umbrella was fictitious from the beginning, or at least has become such. And so I think that has shown the world, but certainly our allies in the region, that the U.S. can't be trusted to defend them and provide security. And they're wanting this war to, I think with the exception of maybe some Saudi leaders, maybe UAE, they want this war to end as soon as possible. And then they're, like, as you said, they're going to make a deal with Iranian leaders to ensure, to collaborate to ensure that assure Iran that they're not enemies. They're not going to side with the U.S. militarily. Obviously, there's not a single country in the world that's come to the U.S. assistance, aside from Israel, of course, that started this war. All of our NATO allies, they didn't send so much as a minesweeper or a military advisor, showing that the NATO alliance doesn't apply outside of the North Atlantic region, which of course it doesn't. But Trump has responded by threatening to leave NATO, which I think would be an awesome development. If there's anything good that could come out of this horrible war, I think the U.S. leaving NATO would be a really great deal. Obviously, we could pull out of the war in Ukraine. That war could end very quickly. And then the U.S. could go back to being a hemispheric superpower, as I've been advocating for the past 23 years.
I remember you said that, before the election, Vivek Ramaswamy, then you joined Donald Trump, and you mentioned that various times on this podcast. But David, we had John Kerry talking about what has happened with the case of Netanyahu. He literally said each and every administration had this proposal from Benjamin Netanyahu. He wanted this war for such a long time. How do you see just the only guy who decided to go to war is Donald Trump? Why is that? What was the problem? And how did he convince Donald Trump and his administration to go to this war?
Well, those reports are absolutely correct. I mean, from the time of the George W. Bush administration, Netanyahu has gone to the White House and tried to do a hard sell of this kind to really all he was asking for essentially was the friend or foe codes, so they could fly their aircraft over Jordan and Iraq and not get shot down. And all Bush, Obama, and Biden all chose to deny permission for Israel essentially to start a war of aggression against Iran. And it was only Trump that was foolish enough to approve it. And he did so despite the fact that the U.S. has had war games for the last 20 years that have shown that in a war between the U.S. and Iran, Iran could not be defeated. I would call that a U.S. defeat. So essentially, we knew that victory was that such a war would be unwinnable. And as the New York Times article stated, there were heated and chaotic discussions in the cabinet and the National Security Council that where everyone essentially said that this is going to be a bad deal. It might not be winnable, and the only one that said it was winnable, of course, was Hegseth and Trump. And Netanyahu and their voices prevailed, but J.D. Vance, did a great job trying to dissuade the president from taking this action and going to war with Iran, starting an unnecessary imperial war of aggression. That's a regional war, a great power war, the first we've seen that the U.S. has been involved in since the Korean War, that had a major possibility of escalating in World War III. Thankfully, the ceasefire, Trump appears to have tired of this war, seeing that it's unwinnable. He can't get Iran to do what he wants them to do. So he's going to, do the ceasefire. He's extended it indefinitely as of 2 days ago. Of course, he could change. He could change on a dime, and he was famous for that. But based on other articles, there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out that says he acted fearfully. As soon as we had an airman that was shot down, a Air Force colonel that was in the weapons officer in the F-15E that was shot down by Iranian air defenses. He was, he said we need to get him back, because I'm worried that this could sink my poll numbers. Well, his poll numbers are already in the tank, but I think he's learned his lesson that, he shouldn't do a ground invasion of Iran because it would be disastrous for us.
I think that Benjamin Netanyahu finally got to the place, because he, as we talked about it before, he wanted this war. In your assessment, what was the outcome of this war so far for Israel? Israel is different. They think differently. They don't see the way, even with the war happening in Iran, I would argue the agenda on the part of Israelis was totally different from what was in the mind of the Trump administration. But what is, considering their agenda, their sort of understanding of the war against Iran, what have they achieved so far?
Well, for Netanyahu, you're right. Their interests are very different from those of the United States. They don't care if the Strait or Hormuz is closed. They don't get much, if any, oil out of the Strait and the Persian Gulf. So Netanyahu's objective has been very clear. Over the past 20 years, maybe 25 years, his agenda has been Israeli hegemony over the entire Middle East, with the exception of Pakistan, essentially. So Iran was really, after he took out, he succeeded in getting the U.S. to help him overthrow the Assad regime in Syria, which I would argue was much more favorable than the former Al-Qaeda-led regime we have today in Syria. Then and degraded actually Hamas wasn't degraded too much. They actually gained a lot more militiamen since Israel started that war. It was a major defeat for Israel. It pretty much one-to-one casualties. Hamas went from, I think, 25,000 or 32,000 to 40,000. So they've actually been strengthened by that war. But Hezbollah has been partially degraded. So there's been limited successes in Lebanon. Of course, that war was raging until like a week ago, and it could restart at any moment. But I do think that Iran, or rather Israel, calculates that the Iran war has been able, U.S. intelligence reports that 50% of Iran's missile launchers have been taken out, 1/3 of its air force, and 40% of its navy. Specifically, I think the IRGC Navy has been destroyed or disabled. So there has been some success militarily. Certainly, the Iranian economy has been massively damaged. Their financial system, that the worth of their currency has gone down a lot. I think that could recover, within not too much time after war ended and a blockade ended. But there has been substantial, weakening from that end. But in terms of the strategic level, Iran has been greatly strengthened because they're now the regional hegemon of the Gulf, and people have to recognize that. The U.S. has to recognize that. Essentially, the U.S. Navy has proven powerless to dispute Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. So that is kind of a revolution in regional power dynamics.
You mentioned the domestic, and we know that the Trump administration came a long, long way when it comes to the war with Iran. We had Charlie Kirk before the war, the first round of war happening. He did everything. We remember what he was trying to do. He said, no, this war is going to be devastating. We don't need this war. The United States doesn't need this war. And we know what has happened to Charlie Kirk. Then we had Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, all the people, Megyn Kelly, the people who were supporting unconditionally Donald Trump. They didn't receive anything from Donald Trump, I would say. They did everything to help him to get elected. But finally, who's the best friend of the president of the United States is Lindsey Graham. It's just unbelievable. It doesn't matter you have Joe Biden in office or Donald Trump. The best friend continues to be Lindsey Graham. What is that? How is that going to influence the Republican Party and the future of the party, considering the way that Donald Trump has somehow destroyed his bases?
Yeah, great question. So, Trump's election-winning MAGA coalition was wide-ranging and included, working class, educated, white people, even blacks and Hispanics, and pretty much independents and everyone who youth. He almost won youth, the young adults during the November election, 2024 election, and that coalition is pretty much gone. And he's as Pierce Morgan has stated, he's absolutely seems to be going after everyone. He's going after Christians, he's going after Catholics, he's insulted the Pope, he pretends he's Jesus, he wants us to worship him as some kind of minor deity. I mean, he's just gone completely nuts. And then he's threatening nuclear genocide against 92 million Iranian civilians, and claiming that he has Iran's best, the people's best interests at heart. I mean, it's ludicrous. And this is not the leader we elected. We elected a leader who gave his inaugural address and said he was going to be a transformational peace president that ended America's forever wars and didn't start any new ones and saved us from World War III. And with the exception of World War III, he's pretty much gone 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So I think this is going to severely imperil the Republican Party's electoral prospects for not just the next two elections, but maybe the next 3 to 4. We could lose power for a generation. I'm a lifelong Republican. Again, I've been a Trump supporter for many years. He totally lost me on this one. He can get me back, if he makes peace with Iran, drops the blockade, signs a deal acceptable to Iran, pulls U.S. troops out of the Middle East, cuts off security assistance to Israel, ends the war in Ukraine. It's just really the Middle East part that I'm concerned about. So I would support him again if he did all those things I just mentioned. But then, as an added bonus, I'd like to see him pull out of NATO, or at least the NATO military command structure, and sign a bilateral peace deal with Russia, and then pressure Zelensky to sign it. But that's a long road. I don't think he's going to do it. He's surrounded himself by neocons. He's reportedly planning on forcing Tulsi Gabbard out as director of national intelligence by by November. Vice President J.D. Vance has reportedly been sidelined in policy discussions. He wasn't allowed to be in this with Trump during both the Venezuela and Iran war strikes because he opposed both. He's put his principles first. I think he's in a good position to win the nomination, but Trump has destroyed his chances to win the general election in 2028.
He sent him as the main negotiator to Islamabad, because Iranian side was asking the J.D. Vance, if someone gonna negotiate with us, it's gonna be J.D. Vance. We're not gonna negotiate with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. That's why Donald Trump sent him. But during the talks, I talked with Professor Marandi, who was with the Iranian delegation in Islamabad. He said that J.D. Vance, every time, more than 12 times, he called Donald Trump or someone in Washington, and then he called even Benjamin Netanyahu to. Why is that? And where is that sort of, because Donald Trump, when you sent the vice president of the United States to this high-level negotiations, you have to give some sort of authority, some sort of framework to him. It didn't seem that he had that sort of agenda being delivered to J.D. Vance.
Yeah, I'd posted, before Vance went to represent us in the peace talks, that if Trump simply gave J.D. Vance plenipotentiary powers to act with full authority, he could, wrap up a deal in 24 hours. I'm convinced of that. I think he could have. I mean, we got fairly close. I think we got pretty close before Trump ordered him to pull out over his Maxwell's demands on no enrichment for Iran in terms of uranium enrichment, and also to surrender all of their 60% highly enriched uranium stockpile, which is about 1,000 pounds worth, to the U.S. Other than that, I think we were pretty close to a deal, and Iran was willing to stay. And here we have The next day, he imposed the blockade, and the blockade is the reason why the peace talks haven't continued. So, but in terms of Vance, I think seen reports that he had to call Trump 21 times in 21 hours for authority to to make a certain concessions, or and then of course Netanyahu as well. So Netanyahu boasted that he's called by high-level Trump officials every day. So it's made clear who runs U.S. Middle Eastern foreign policy. It's not President Trump. It's Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Netanyahu, of course, is a war criminal. So it's a disgrace that any foreign leader would control our regional foreign policy in the Middle East, let alone a war criminal like Netanyahu.
What's so amazing, David, that Benjamin Netanyahu is not in a good position in Israel. And Donald Trump is helping him drastically. He's helping him in Israel, outside of Israel. And many people are asking, how can he manage that sort of leverage on Donald Trump? Because we've seen nobody being capable of gaining that much of Donald Trump.
Well, I mean, this is all speculation, of course, but President Trump, he was America first, the first 3 to 3.5 months of his second term in office. And then, since about May, it was mid-May when he started covering up the Epstein files and acting like he was very guilty, like it wasn't like it seemed very personal to him. He got very angry. He turned against Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, every Republican that tried to force him to release the files, of which only I think 10% of the actual content has been released. 90% is being concealed or redacted. It just shows that it suggests very strongly that he has committed sexual criminal misconduct with minor girls. It took me a long time to really accept that. I didn't want to believe that of our president, but there have been credible allegations of him, having criminal sexual abuse of 2 minor girls, young women, teenagers. And so I think that we know that the Epstein sex ring scandal was an Israeli Mossad operation, that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. And so we also know that Netanyahu, bugs the phones. He's gotten Trump, the whole White House, to use an Israeli signal app so he can read every text message that is sent on a supposedly secure messaging system in the White House. So he knows what to say, how to push Trump's buttons. I mean, he had Mike Waltz, his national security advisor, would come to talk to Netanyahu and basically tell him what he needed to say. I think Lindsey Graham did the same thing. This is what you need to say to get President Trump to do your bidding and go to war with Iran. And Waltz got fired. He just got demoted to a lower ranking cabinet position. It seemed that everything was going swimmingly well. In April of last year when that happened, I cheered on Trump for doing that. I think it was actually early May. But then it's been all downhill since with the 12-day war, and of course the 38-day war, which is morphing into a 2-month war with indefinite duration with this never-ending U.S. naval blockade.
Considering the war that is happening, we are hearing from the Israeli officials that the next enemy, they're talking this way, basically, that Gaza and Palestine and the West Bank was yesterday. Today is Iran and Lebanon. Tomorrow is Turkey. And on the other hand, the U.S. envoy to Turkey, Tom Barak, he said that whoever thinks in Israel, whoever thinks that they can fight this way, they're just delusional. But is there any, even with Tom Barak, they attacked Tom Barak after, this sort of his stance, his comment on Israel. And even they don't believe that these people can just have a little bit of disagreement with the Israelis. They attack, but considering what has happened in the Middle East, David, I think the United States I don't know if there is such a grand strategy. We have the national security strategy, by the way. The latest version of the national security strategy says Iran and Russia are not existential threat to the United States. This was written in the latest version of national, but we have this war happening. And you've mentioned the role of Israel in this war. What would happen to the grand strategy of the United States, in your opinion? I'm not talking about the Trump administration. The way that you see the grand strategy of the United States, is it going to get, involved in these endless wars of Israel in the Middle East? Is it going to be something bigger than that, to see the whole region, not only the situation in the West Asia, but also the case of Ukraine, see a big picture of the region of the Eurasia?
Well, I think that this is probably as bad as it's going to get. I think with Iran, certainly this war could be restarted on a dime. President Trump is famously a flip flopper. Has a bipolar foreign policy, so he can flip from one day to the next or within the same day his positions. He could say, Iran has a deadline of Sunday, and then he can enforce it and start bombing. I mean, he could invade Kark Island, but I don't think he's going to do it. I think he's really tired of this war. I think he's going to end it. I don't, if Israel were to bomb Turkey, I mean, Turkey is a NATO member state. NATO supposedly applies to the North Atlantic region, but Turkey is within Europe. They have part of Europe. They have obviously Istanbul is located in Europe, so they're really a European continental power, not just in West Asia. The Middle East. It's hard for me to see how that would go down. Obviously, Israel could prevail because they have nuclear weapons. But I mean, if Turkey wasn't afraid, they could, simply occupy Syria and Lebanon and fight it out conventionally. I think that's certainly a possibility. And maybe NATO countries would stay neutral, and probably Trump would tell Israel to knock it off. But Netanyahu probably has the goods on Trump, so that might not works so well. But I don't think Trump would support that. I don't think Trump's going to bomb Turkey. I think Trump is, he's made it clear that he wants to refocus on the Western Hemisphere once his Iran so-called excursion is over, and he wants it to be over. So his next target is Cuba. He wants to blockade Cuba. He wants to arrest their president, Maduro style, and then try to, work with whoever the vice president is to, to try to open up Cuba to U.S. business interests. I don't see how that really helps. That would help Cuba, obviously, helping the Cuban people get out of the oil embargo. They're really suffering. They're one of the poorest countries in the world because of U.S. sanctions, but it hasn't ejected their communist regime. I mean, they've been communist since obviously since long before I was born, around 1960 or 59, I guess, is when Castro took power. So I think that's the refocus that Trump's planning on. And I think he really has no interest in fighting a war with China over Taiwan as well. He's given some degree of assurances to Xi Jinping that he wants to make a deal with over Taiwan.
He's going to go to China on May 15th. And do you think by then he's going to have some sort of leverage in the Middle East before going to China? And how is that going to be seen by Chinese government?
Well, that's the interesting thing is, reportedly Trump's grand strategy is to try to pressure China, so he wants to make a deal with China, but he wants, over Taiwan and everything else, but he wants it to be more on U.S. terms. So he's trying to increase the pressure points. He cut off Venezuelan oil to China, which I think was 6.67% of total Chinese imports. And that he's trying to do the same with Iran. He's just starting to with the blockade. Before that, for the first 6 weeks of the war, the shipment of oil to Iranian oil to China had actually increased by a good margin. So, but Chinese officials have stated, it was Dr. Robert Pape that stated he went to dinner with Chinese leaders and asked them about the blockade, whether they were concerned about it. And they said, well, we could lose 1% of our GDP, but we think it's, the advantages of the U.S. getting bogged down in a Middle Eastern war far outweigh any costs, economic costs we'd have to bear. So, Iran's oil, I think, is about 13.5% of their total imports. I don't think it's, this is going to be a long-term thing. I think Trump's going to be forced to lift the blockade very soon, or else, the U.S. is going to go into a recession right before the midterm elections. But I think that's the mentality of Trump, is he's trying to isolate China economically with regards to oil, and then thinking that he'll have the advantage, or so-called, quote unquote, leverage in any negotiations with China moving forward.
I think that when it comes to the Iranian blockade, it's a huge military operation looking at what is going on, because they're in the Arabian Sea and the area is just big, and the operations so far, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they have seized, or they have taken under their control 3 tankers, if I'm not mistaken. Iran had the same number on their side. This is that helping the way that, because the whole concept of the blockade is just to, because Donald Trump was so much concerned about the global economy, the cost, how the price of oil and gas is rising. And then you see he's coming with some sort of genius idea that let's blockade the blockade. And what is your understanding of that?
Well, that's the funny thing, isn't it? Because, President Trump spent the first 6 weeks of the war, 8 weeks of the war, threatening Iran if they didn't, lift their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and open up the Strait of Hormuz. He was going to nuke them, or he was going to bomb all their, destroy all their power plants and most of their oil refineries. And now he's boasting on Truth Social that he's been able to, to close and blockade the Strait of Hormuz, tight, so there no ships can get out. So he's really become completely flip-flopped on that. I posted, I think, this morning that he's either bipolar or mentally unstable. But that's, he's turned U.S. strategy on its head, because we have a vested interest in keeping the strait open, because if we don't, gas prices will surge to $6 a gallon within the next couple months, and there'll be a global and U.S. recession. So the only way around that is he needs to lift the blockade. He needs to get Iran to open up the strait. The grim reality is that it's going to be open under IRGC control, and Iran stated today that they're going to have these transit fees on, or tolls on all ships going through the strait. They banned Israeli ships. They said U.S. ships will be able to come, commercial vessels only, will be able to enter the Persian Gulf, provided they pay a toll fee that's much in excess of the fee being charged to everyone else. All the countries sanctioning Iran are going to get higher fees, and of course Trump can easily avoid that by simply lifting all sanctions on Iran, and then he'll get to pay the same $1 a barrel fee that everyone else pays.
Today, we've learned from the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz. He said that they're totally prepared to restart the war, and they're waiting for the green light from the Trump administration. So before the ceasefire happening, we know that basically Israelis were not that much involved in the war. It was the United States and Iran. Israel was much involved in Lebanon, and because Hezbollah, they said that Hezbollah is destroyed. Hezbollah doesn't have anything. And we saw that Hezbollah is just hitting not only the central part of Israel, they're hitting the southern part of Israel, which they never did before, And when Israel is saying that they're prepared to continue the war, and considering what was reported on Wall Street Journal, on CNN as well, how they're short of interceptors. The air defense system is not working properly because of the radars being destroyed in the region and in Israel as well. And so there is no communications, and they're short of interceptors, they're short of cruise missiles, as was reported by CNN. Well, what is the situation with the continuation of the war?
Well, I think Netanyahu wouldn't dare restart the war unless he had assurances that the U.S. would conduct the majority of the strikes. I think he wants to get the U.S. bogged down in a forever war in Iran. He's pushing for the U.S. to take Karg Island, to take control of a lot of their oil. Of course, a lot of their oil production could be transferred, but somehow the mentality is that if we capture Karg Island, which is way in the western Persian Gulf on the edge, that even though it's far away from the Strait of Hormuz, somehow that would give us control of the strait, and that math just doesn't add up. Obviously we could land a U.S. Army 82nd Airborne Division brigade on the island, assuming their planes aren't shot out of the sky. We can occupy that territory. They're going to, our troops are going to get mauled because they'd be out in the open with no, natural defenses or fortifications. Obviously, they could dig in and stuff, but essentially they would just be hostages because the straits mine. Trump joked about, well, I think Iran's laid about 1 to 13 mines, and we could pick those up and clear the strait in a single day. In fact, it could be hundreds or thousands. And there's an article that came out today or yesterday that it said the U.S. Navy would take 6 months to clear the mines, even if Iran let us do it. So we just don't have minesweepers anymore. I think we had 3 in the region. We withdrew them all because we had 2 weeks notice before the U.S. went to war. In terms of the military getting notice that we needed to do some troop withdrawals and readjustments, so we didn't get a lot of our ships and sunk and troops killed. So I think that's it's not going too well.
We've seen some sort of different behavior from Europeans since the war started. Then when the war started, they tried to help Israel, to defend Israel. When it comes to the Cyprus, they sent some of their aircraft carriers or military ships to defend Israel, and they use the radars, bases to communicate with air defense systems. But after all, when it came to the Strait of Hormuz, they said, no, we're not going to be part of that operation. And Donald Trump did everything. He put pressure. I'm going to leave NATO, and NATO doesn't matter NATO anymore. He even yesterday divided NATO into good and bad countries. And what has happened? What is your understanding of the way that the European countries who are part of NATO behaved so far? The other point is the report on CNN. They said it doesn't matter if Europe is willing to join the war because they don't have much to offer to the conflict. Your understanding of that?
Well, I think President Trump, we need to understand that he views himself as kind of a Roman emperor. Every country in the world, aside from Russia and China, he views as some kind of vassal state, except for North Korea. So he wants this. He wants tribute. He talks about how Iran sent 8 tankers full of fuel, 16 million gallons of oil, or I think it was 20. He said 20 tankers that they sent as a gift of tribute to express their gratitude for killing the first family and their supreme leader. I mean, how ridiculous can he be? I mean, he just makes up the deep fake news. There was a story about the 8. I know I'm veering off a little bit from your question about Europe, but there was a story about the eight women that were supposedly prisoners of Iran. That turned out to be bogus. The women were real, but in fact, 4 had been released, and none of them were on death row. The other 4 were maybe facing a year in prison, so for protesting. So Trump just made up that story. But the European leaders, they behaved as U.S. vassals right up until Trump took office, and then when he veered from the pro-war, Ukraine war, anti-Russian line, they finally showed independence, and it was interesting. Biden set the policy. They were skittish about fighting a proxy war with Russia, but then they converted to Biden's line of thinking, and it's become kind of religious dogma for them that they have to fight World War III with Russia, or fight them in Ukraine indefinitely. And since then, they've become a lot more independent thinking and oppositional to Donald Trump. They've tried to manipulate him, as Zelensky has and as Netanyahu has, to doing their bidding, and they've pretty much succeeded. But this was, this Iran war, as it was for me, was kind of a bridge too far for them to accept, because it's an illegal war. It's a war that's was a sneak attack. It was unprovoked war of aggression. Iran had not attacked the U.S. There was no imminent threat of attack against the U.S. or U.S. military bases, according to our U.S. intelligence and the Department of Defense or Department of War. So they weren't going to support it. We didn't even tell them ahead of time that it was going to happen. And as you alluded to, France, Spain, Italy, and other countries have denied us naval basing rights and rights to their airspace for any warplanes traveling to and from, or even refueling tankers traveling to and from the Iranian theater, the Middle East theater of war. So I think, Trump is, he's mad at them and views them as, he wants tribute from them. He wants them to kiss the ring, bend the knee, just like kind of Game of Thrones style.
Yeah. David, before wrapping up this session, how do you see the petrodollar? How do you see, because Donald Trump, I remember every time before being elected and after being elected, he was talking about how we can bring the jobs back in the United States, how we can make dollars stronger and more mightier. And how do you see the situation with dollar?
I think it's it's just going to worsen. I mean, it's starting with when we cut off Russia from the SWIFT system, the banking system that was U.S. dollar based. I think we lost about 11% of the share of our, the dollarization of the world's currency and trade. And Iran just stated this morning that all of these transit fees will have to be paid in Iranian currency, not U.S. currency. So that's going to further erode it. And obviously they control, 20% of the world's oil reserves in terms of traffic going in and out of the Persian Gulf. So, once again, President Trump has sacrificed his entire policy agenda. I mean, really, politically, economically, the whole message that the Republican Party had decided. They had these big powwows. I think in January, they met with Republican leaders at the White House and said, okay, we're going to run on this economic agenda. We're going to tout all the lower fuel costs, lower cost of living, all this stuff, tariffs, how that's helped us out. And now all that is out the window. The de-dollarization of the world is going to increase the cost of living here in the United States, and it's going to hurt the working class. I mean, the working class is now opposing Trump. For the first time, that was really his core constituency. He ran on being representing the forgotten man and woman, and now he's doing the exact opposite. And all this just for Israel. Iran didn't pose us any imminent threat whatsoever. There was no reason to attack them. Yes, they likely do have a modest nuclear arsenal. They haven't threatened to use it. They haven't used it. So basically, this is a war of lies, is what I'm trying to say. Is just like David Sachs talked about the Ukraine war, Biden's war in Ukraine being a war of lies. Trump's war in Iran is a war of lies as well.
Thank you so much, David, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thanks, Neem. Always a pleasure.